Thanks everyone for having me here. What I want to do today is kind of go back to the basics, because sometimes I see very isolated discussion on certain specific elements, but at the end you have to, I want to kind of help you to figure out the whole picture and figure out what can be done. So I go back to the story of where kind of what are the roles in the payment ecosystem, and I go beyond cards, so it also flies outside the cards world. But at the end, you want a payees and a payers to kind of meet each other and have a transparent way of doing everything together. Now, let me explain first of all what the role of a scheme is in this. And in domains where you don't have a scheme, what you're kind of missing. A scheme at the end helps with all these players in the marketplace, no matter how many they are, to kind of ensure that the participants are of the good quality of participants that you want to have. They put like minimum requirements on participation. Are you secure enough? Are you safe enough? Because if you're not secure and safe enough, it will damage the trust in the scheme. So a scheme has a natural economic reason to ensure that players that participate to that payment scheme are trustworthy. The second thing that schemes make sure is that you have end-to-end security. Because today, if you are a niche player and you play on parts of the value chain, you cannot guarantee end-to-end security. So that's the reason why schemes put things in place like encryption, where we say you have to encrypt your data that you transfer. You're not allowed to store data unless it's PCI compliant. That are rules that the scheme kind of helps you to establish, and where we then bring the whole market together to establish that framework. And then the last part is the scheme also puts these minimum security standards. The schemes were very successful in putting EMV standards out across the globe at the end, because now not only Europe is EMV compliant, but the rest of the world is following. So that is how schemes were able to, with all the participants and with all the participants, to kind of drive security at a higher level. And the most secure scheme is probably the scheme that will win more business in the future. And that's at the end what the scheme wants to solve for. The other thing what schemes and what we try to establish in a payment environment is that fraud is not only covered via a very good, strong authentication. Authentication is not a sufficient condition to be good, to be a secure and safe payment instrument. Authentication is a piece of prevention. Yeah? So I hear a lot of debate on how strong authentication will solve everything. No, strong authentication will, to be honest, will fail, because there is always a means to find a way around it. The fraudsters have a business case, and the bigger you are, the more risk you have on fraud. So if you have a very small scheme, you probably don't have fraud. Yeah? Because the sooner you get to a scale, fraudsters will look at it, say, I have a business case for fraud, and I will attack you. So everyone will doomed to have fraud later, sooner or later. Even so forth. Just to make yeah? So let's be very clear there. So this prevention is one part. But once you have fraud, what you definitely have to have is also a system that detects the fraud. That if fraud is there, how can I detect that something based on historical data, based on whatever knowledge I have on behavior of the consumer, can I help detection of fraud? And there it's important that you don't trust one party to check fraud. Everyone in the value chain should have a system to detect fraud. The merchants, the acquirer or the receiver of the payment, the switch, but also the issuer or the one holding the funds. All systems have fraud, because if one fails, the other can take it up. So it's also very, very important to have a system for detection. And then the last part, which is totally forgotten in most of the cases, is remediation. That is, if fraud happens, and fraud will happen, do I have any means to be able to kind of help the consumer with that bad experience to get back his funds, to get a replacement vehicle for payments? If I use an IBAN number as a vehicle for payments, and it's fraudulent, that means I have to replace my IBAN number, with all the negative consequences of us replacing, all the difficulties of replacing an IBAN number. A very hard thing to do. Yeah? Because that means I have to change all my direct debits, I have to change my relationship with the bank. There's a huge consequence, makes it very, very inconvenient. So a card, or a token, and I'll come back later on, a card, for example, replacing a card is a way less costly event for a consumer than replacing an IBAN number. So all these elements together, those make that you have a secure environment. Yeah? Not only authentication. And that's kind of the very first. And I want now to say, okay, this is seems to be very complex. And let's say, okay, it's so complex, will it not kill the topic of innovation? Can I still innovate in this environment? Because it's so complex and I don't know what to innovate. Now, I give you the example of Apple Pay, and let me be very clear. Apple Pay is a first step in a cycle where other providers of hardware and software will also enter in. So it's not exclusive Apple Pay. Samsung Pay and whatever other pay will come. But Apple Pay innovates on the security level in 3 distinct new ways. And now let me explain them one by one. The first one is Apple Pay helps, first of all, the consumer experience, but using biometrics as means of authentication. I use my thumb or I use any of my fingers to secure on the device to validate if that my fingerprint is genuine, is my fingerprint, meaning that I'm the one who I'm claimed to be at the device level. But authentication is also put at the level of the issuer who validates whether or not all the credentials are there to see if that type of payment is allowed. So first of all, Apple Pay solves a consumer-friendly way, not having to remember passwords, just on biometrics. That's the first innovation of Apple Pay on the security and safety level. The second innovation of Apple Pay on the security and safety level is that we have introduced the concept of tokenization. Now, tokenization, what does it do? It makes against the replacement cost of remediation cost of an issue smaller. Secondly, it splits the physical world from the virtual world, but using the same standards. So whenever a token is compromised, and we know the internet is much more vulnerable than the physical world, you have an easy detection that that instrument can only be used in the e-commerce environment and not in the physical world. So the spillover effects of my cloud is someone hacked my data, my card data on the internet and used it in the physical world, that one is solved with the tokenization issue. So that is what tokenization will bring you as a security measure on the future of payments. The last thing what we did with Apple Pay is that we leveraged the concept of EMV on an internet payments. So what Apple Pay transaction is a genuine EMV transaction. So you put the fraud, the security and safety you can get on the physical world, you also put it on the virtual world. So that are 3 innovations that we did in this scheme can totally be done without, so can totally be done, can totally be delivered without interrupting the ability for every party to innovate on this and now to have new means of payment that opens at the end the mobile payment industry towards leveraging at the end the whole card infrastructure that is existing. And that is at the end what Apple Pay drives. So that is kind of one example of innovation. The second example of innovation that I want to highlight is a solution that MasterCard put in market, which is called SafetyNet. One of the problems that we saw across in Middle East and Africa coming up, and AP repeating it, and we'll expect it to come to Europe very, very rapidly, is the cyber attacks. So there are a lot of new cyber attacks where fraudsters focus on the banking host infrastructure or in the host infrastructure where payment credentials are held or payment instruments are managed. They change whatever limits are there or whatever limitations are there for authorization. And then they kind of produce plastic cards that attack massively at the same moment the host. This led to a few cases, but always with $50 million kind of fraud levels. So with 1 to 2 to 10 cards. Very small, but very, very targeted. Now, the problem is that that type of attacks, the fund holding banks or the issuers, they have no defense against this because they're not even aware that they're being hacked. Yeah? So that is the reason why you have the need for this multi-layer kind of fraud checks. Because then what MasterCard will now do is we will, as a switch, in the person in the middle, we will put an additional layer of controls to see if that type of transactions happens, we block them on behalf of the banks. Just as a way to protect the industry against this fraud of attacks where an individual bank cannot be protected against because the investment is or way too big, or the likelihood of that event to happen on a particular bank is way too small. So that is how innovation in safety and security is still enabled in this whole complex model. And I think what we see in MasterCard is that we can't predict the future. We can't tell you what will be the next type of fraud behavior that will happen. The only thing what we say is with this four-party model, with us in a role as a scheme, in a role of seeing the transactions, we can help all the participants to kind of figure out how to defend against this new type of attacks, no matter what they are. Yeah? Will MasterCard ever become 100% fraud-proof? No. Will we do our best and do a lot of efforts to keep it at a minimum level? Yes, because we live out of the trust of consumers that say, I have this plastic in my hand, I have this mobile in my hand. When I do this payment, I trust that instrument because they prevent me, they help me to prevent fraud, they have good systems to detect fraud, but they also, when there is a problem, I get my funds back. Summary of kind of how I want to kind of, as an introduction, explain how the role of MasterCard and all the other schemes are in the card business, seeing an extremely role. Can this role be taken over by a regulator, and can regulators say, I'll do all this? Yes, but I think with that you also kill the innovation part. Because when you standardize everything, you will have no differentiation between left or right, and everyone does exactly the same thing, and that will mean totally inflexible for dealing with new technologies, new innovations, but also with new types of fraud attacks. Thank you.